Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Poetry at the Point, yet again online, a monthly reading series organized by the St. Louis Poetry Center. My name is Kenneth Pruitt. I use he, him pronouns. I am the curator and host of this series. I'm really excited to be with you this evening to bring you the poetry of Becky Ellis, Matt Freeman, and Teddy Norris. So welcome to all of you. I'm really glad you're here. As I said before we got started, so I'll say it publicly, thank you for pivoting to this virtual setting that we had to return to make sure to keep everybody safe. So thanks for being here. A few quick announcements before we get started. First of all, the Nash Poetry Contest, our annual poetry contest, officially opens on February 25th, just in a few days. This contest will be judged by, I'm really excited about this, Gabrielle Calvacaresi. The first prize winner receives $500. And the winner and two finalists will be featured on St. Louis Poetry Center's website. This contest is open to all poets residing within a 100-mile radius of St. Louis, and submissions are due March 31st. So for all the guidelines and to submit your poems online, check out our website. That is stlouispoetrycenter.org. As always, we want to thank our many members and supporters of the Poetry Center. The link on your screen will take you to an opportunity where you yourself can become a member. It's super duper easy. Every little bit helps. And also a huge shout out, as always, to the Missouri Arts Council, whose support makes this particular series possible every year. If you are watching this in real time on Facebook Live, we're really glad you're here. Pretty please comment and share that link, because we want to boost the signal for this series and for these wonderful poets, but also post your questions for the poets themselves. Last month, we had a fair amount of folks asking questions of them to be addressed at a Q&A time for the evening at the end. So don't be shy. Pretty please put those comments either in Facebook or if you're watching on YouTube that way. If you're viewing this after February 22nd, we're still glad you're here. You can still comment, you can still share, and we can continue to build support for this series. We're also going to post links on Facebook as they come up for you to potentially support these poets by accessing more of their work, which is always a wonderful part of this as well. So on to the poetry, and we're going to start with Becky Ellis. Rebecca Ellis lives in Southern Illinois. Her poems can be found in About Place Journal, the American Journal of Poetry, Crab Creek Review, Naugatuck River Review, hope I pronounced that correctly, to that literary magazine, Bellevue Literary Review, and Prairie Schooner. She is a master naturalist through the University of Illinois Extension Service. Becky, all of my flowers are coming up this week, and I don't know how I feel about climate change, but I will let you have the floor and read some poems. Thanks for coming.
Okay, thanks very much. I'd like to thank the St. Louis Poetry Center and Kenneth Pruitt for hosting this, and Aaron Quick for being the wizard behind the curtain running all this. It's a great opportunity to be here with some other poets that I really like and respect, so I'm looking forward to this. And thank you all for coming and listening. It's just a great privilege. I thought I'd read tonight some poems that are about looking at things. I found myself during this pandemic spending a lot of time inside the house, looking at things outside the window, in a car, looking at things outside the car, or just looking at things, trying to see things in a new way, or trying to look at something in a more positive way. So a lot of these poems are about finding a different way to look at things. So we're going to start with one called Spring Ephemerals. And ephemerals, for those of you who are not master naturalists, are early spring flowers like bloodroot, Dutchman's breeches, things that come up pretty much after the snow is gone, or even during some of the last snow. And they're small flowers near the ground, and they're fragile, and they're gone pretty quickly, but they're beautiful when they're there. So this is about a hike to look at some spring ephemerals. A student at the end of our line of hikers, kneeling in the spring ephemerals along the ditch, dug out with her fingers the broken skeleton of a cat. "How do you know it's a cat?" we asked. Squinting at it, she said, "The sagittal crest, here," running her finger along the edge, the delicate knitted seam of its small skull. "And look, the teeth," she said. "The cat was old." Hikers in front of us slowly came back, one by one, to stand in quiet wonder. And I live in front of behind my house is a large stand of trees, and very often we'll get deer, turkeys, foxes, the whole bit back there. So this one is about looking out the window at some deer. Briefly in snow. The twin yearlings bed down in late snow, just when buds have begun uncurling. Under the oak's white shoulders, snow keeps shaking over them as if, once fallen, it must fall again. From inside, I watch the stillness of these twins as morning draws open the trees. Then I see the doe move toward them, her gray coat exactly matching the wintered trunks. She's fat with new fawns, her sides round as a drum, ready to divide those yearlings' lives into before, after. The family of deer breathe in the cold air, breathe it out steaming, and I, in the dry warmth of the house, take in what the world in a small landscape delivers. And this one takes the opposite view. I'm actually inside the house looking at something outside and then inside the house. It's called The Lilacs in Quarantine. The lilac bush lifts its arms outside the window, a choirmaster in purple robes, ready for the downbeat. Here on the tabletop, leaning in a jar, the cut branch nods when a breeze eases into the room. On thin black stems, the captured blossoms sway, or maybe they're singing quietly, filling the quiet with more quiet. Maybe that's what plants do, thrilling to lean forward together, part of the chorus, and still liquid with golden sap. The tight buds at the tip, ready to open like small purple hands, the song silent but full-throated. And one of the things I struggled with through this pandemic was all the sadness of losing some people, friends or myself being sick, or just the isolation, just the general depression of it all. And I realized that I had to find a way to engage with that sadness, to not ignore it, to engage with it, but then have a way to move on from it. So this happened. It's called Sorrow. I ride a horse named Sorrow. I ride him under sun, under moon. I ride him over rough hills and the low barrens. I ride him toward the snow-topped mountains through the blue rain. His forefoot is sure as it strikes the ground. His sides are wet with lather. His ears are tender as calla lilies and twist back toward me when I finally learn to say his name. Sorrow carries me and I cannot stop him. He teaches me to ride, to clutch him with my strong thighs, to lay my arm against his neck, to never pull the bit against his soft mouth. And when it is done and there is no sun, no moon, and the blue rain stops, I leave him in that sacred place where he can rest in the sweet grass. And also I'd like to write poems that are pretty much stories of just the things that happen, things that I overhear, or just things that happen around the house. Little narrative poems. So this is one of those. It's called You Pick Up the Phone When My Sister Calls. You are earning gold stars and you don't even know it. I hear you say, you matter to her. And I know if I said it, she'd push away. You say it and it absorbs her. She absorbs it, a slow stone coaster taking in condensation from a glass. Summers of iced tea on the lawn, leaning back in big Adirondack chairs, my mother the lodestar for both of us. Now just two sisters, no parents left. We nod toward each other, and it's not quite enough. Anyone who has a sister knows this. And you, the one who was there to pick up the phone, you are separate from that. You are the one I chose, and so your voice matters. She leans into the phone, considering, trying to believe it. Family is kind of fodder for a lot of poems. Sometimes it's a little too complex for a poem, but I try to fit it in anyway. So this one's about after my father died. And I have to say, it's my poem about my father's death. My sister and brother would have a totally different take on it, of course. But this is my poem about that. It's called Catch the Disappearing. I drove 100 miles. It was a warm, sunny day in late November. By a row of gray stones, I set you down, the box gleaming and metallic on the tender yellowed grass. A young man, lean, arms bared, scored clean the sides of a narrow hole and squared the corners. His spade was slender and precise, considerate of the shadowed earth it lifted. To save myself from seeing again the hard box that held you, I focused on his arms, scrolled with blue dragons that breathed magically as he worked. What did you do to earn that gravedigger's gentle care? I wished him happiness, love untouched by fear. I wished him summers of golden corn, a river that rushes away, and that no lost chance should ever betray him. At last he lowered you, then stepped back, looking out at a line of trees. His glance away, another kindness. I bent over the opening and dropped silver-wrapped chocolates, all you really wanted at the end. The foil flashed, tumbling like a fall of stars, one handful, then another, disappearing, darkness. The gravedigger nodded, silent but gorgeously alive. He had laid his shovel on the ground, out of sight, and waited there without moving, until I was in my car, until the motor turned, until I was passing through the wrought iron gate, until I was driving away toward the lowering sun and a hot white sky where stars are there, I know, are there, but to me never visible. One of the nice things about writing poems is that if you don't like the way something turns out, you can change it. So in this poem, after both of my parents had died, I decided to go back and have a redo. It's called Past Life Flyover. When I return to my past life, my father goes fly fishing, and I can see him from the plane, a little speck waving a black stick back and forth over the bending blue of a river. He never liked sports, but this one seems right. Open water, no people, no obligation to bring anything home. I don't know why I'm in a plane, but it feels good to see everything at last. To the west, on the horizon, which is hours away from accepting the hot, plummy sun, its yellow and red skirts. A train whistles, and I know my mother is inside, finishing a short story she started when she was young. She is sitting by a window, leather notebook in her hand, writing in clear script that never changes during her lifetime and doesn't change now in the past, where the train whisks the days smooth and fast before they get boring. Underneath the solid body of the plane, eons that long ago went by without me reappear. Silky gray heads of sauropods lift above the trees, nibbling. A pterodactyl floats, almost level with the plane and nearly as wide. It circles and disappears, circles again, the membranes of its canvas-like wings vast and translucent, the tea-stained brown catching the sun. We fly easily, side by side, having yet such a long way to go. And I thought I'd end with a couple of easier sort of love poems. Just to end on a positive note here. Got 3 short ones. Not a map. And I have to say about this one, this is modeled on a poet named Vivier Francis, had this wonderful line in one of her poems that said basically, not A and B, but A, B, and C. And the thing she had chosen for C totally changed everything. And I was so struck by the simplicity and the wonder of that. It was very effective. It just changed everything. that I thought I'd model a whole poem on that. So, not a map. Not a map and a pair of shoes, but sunrise with its vermilion rays flung up toward the sky and your hair brushing my cheek. Not wine and bread, but 2 paper cups of sangria, a blanket, a meadow furious with buttercups and white asters. Not regret and loss, but a dry black well deeper than I can see, a faint cry from that terrible distance and bearing it. Not now when I want it, but someday after I've forgotten, at the end of summer, a rose opening its pale pink dish of petals. And we'll get more positive now. This is an old one. Everywhere you look is luck. Between us, the night pulls back, deeply black and empty of argument. Seeds at our feet, the fine silt of a braided rose, millennia and a sunrise, palest yellow. On the blunt edge, the well, the wide reservoir, cornflower blue, a late rescue. We're what has been hauled up. And I'll end with one about December. It was a year where there were comets, and we went outside to see them. It was great. December with stars. The neighbor's boat sits empty by the dock. Around the lake, window lights wink out just past midnight. Stars begin to fall. Long tails of meteors flick on the water. 3 dozen white platinum. Overhead and at our feet, spilling of light. Reckless, splendid. Here it's just the 2 of us. Witnesses in silence while the world goes on sleeping. We head back home across frost-crusted lawns, kicking at the frozen world, crystals flung up in the dark. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Becky. I really appreciate it. You've given me a ton of stuff to talk about with you when we're done. So I hope that we have time to do that. But thank you very, very much for being here. Next up is Matthew Freeman. Matt is the author of several collections of poetry, most recently Ideas of Reference at Jesuit Hall by Coffeetown Press and Exile from Two River. He holds an MFA from the University of Missouri St. Louis, where he was awarded the Graduate Poetry Prize, and you can find him on Twitter at Freeman Poet. Matthew, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Kenneth. I'm so proud to be here, and thanks to Aaron Quick, too. And the Poetry Center in general, which has always been helpful and kind to me since I Googled St. Louis poetry many, many years ago. Came out of the poetry show. I should warn you that I selected these poems without realizing that I was going to put a scarf on. If I had planned on that, I may have selected completely different poems, but we'll see. So I will read from that first book Kenneth mentioned, and it's available all over, I guess. I don't know. Maybe it's Subterranean Books. And I'll start with Typical College Vignette. This was back when I began to hear things clearly. The tap of a spoon against a window pane, the knocking of a bedpost against the ceiling, the soft, sorrowful apology of a cop when I picked up my dead phone with no dial tone and asked if anyone were there. And what if I were up high on a billboard? Or what if Luther came through the radio when I was too dismayed to hear modern English and left for the library in the hope that things would stop slipping, and then walked back out into the rain because I could not use a computer, because I could not talk, because I would give her neither name nor address, and ran into dear Colleen, who said with wild eyes, the chaos of creativity came out of catastrophe, and she seemed for a second almost to see me. And then at the exact moment back in the hall, I opened the door to my old apartment and everything lit up, even the old wooden floors. I was wearing motley, and she said, "You're beautiful." And I got strong because I could never say no to a fight against nothingness. So that was that pretty poem. And most of all these are embarrassingly true. This is called Dignity. I keep seeing this rich therapist in Chesterfield because I feel sorry for him. We both pretend that my Medicaid is paying for it when we both know it's not. He says, "Oh, Matt, tell me about the time you thought St. Louis was Athens. Tell me why you buried your license in Forest Park. Let me in on the revisions and secrets." I have to point out to him that when a woman at the bar raises her finger, sometimes it means get away, and sometimes it means that she hates her boyfriend. After I told him what was really going on in the emergency room, he seemed to get a little high. But then I brought him down with the inevitability of genuine angst. Whenever he hears a slight motion behind us at the door, I tell him it's only a blind dude passing by. I'm always asserting that a deflowering cannot take place in a vacuum. And all of this is because of SSI and the time to heal and the dignity it gave me. Ooh, okay. Sometimes it's hard to read these because you're like, I said that. This one I like. It's called Ordained. A great rupture occurred in the 4th grade when I became myself and met Miss Errett, and my eyes grew wide, and I was joking around with Jennifer, and we got put into the hall, and suddenly I felt her lips upon my lips. And the first thing I did was look up lightning in the encyclopedia and copy down the whole passage into my red notebook using the crazy new language I'd developed. And I'd been lost in a rainstorm when I was 7 and became the subject of a strange electric transaction years later with my guitar outside Barnes Jewish. It would be fulfilled, and I'm talking listening devices like in my mother and father's room, all dusty and forlorn, watching a movie about beautiful sailors lost in a storm, and the phone rings, and it's an automated message on what to do in case of lightning. So that could be called a synchronicity, which I love to observe and write about all the time. Hope you're liking the poems. This one's called Own It. I was walking into the driving sleet and snow when an old lamp lit up a ragged sign that said 1 mile to meaning. And I filled out the form while sitting in the cracked plastic chair, and the intake lady said no dice, but that her eyes fluttered. And the difference between me and the big satanic hero was when I looked into the window and got deflated when the woman at the table put her hand through her long black hair when her date was in the bathroom and the candle flickered, and I was conflated with the inside word and out, and I turned to see the caution tape blocking me from wanting what was already my own, and I was criminal and was almost boring. I was tall. I was lost, prefigured, humble, heretical. I had to walk away and say what I had to say to the hysterical song and storm. Thank you. We should talk more about the scarf. It's not mine. It's my sister's. I never pack a scarf. I'm down in Carbondale because my building flooded, by the way. This is called Past Jim, and Jim is Jim Morrison, who kind of obliquely got me into poetry, and I regret it. I wish it were someone a little less whatever he was. I was walking along the top of the elegant balustrade, trying to impress my football coach and my English teacher. And I was drunk and paranoid, and I was thinking, when I trip, I better fall on the right side of this thing. Something had come in and touched me. I didn't know what it was, but I knew it had something to do with birds. After I fell, I broke my left ankle and limped all the way to Green Park and climbed into my cousin's window. Now I'm really self-conscious at the stoplight, and when I get my coffee and drop a packet of sugar on the floor, I say that sugar wanted to drop out. That sugar didn't want to have anything to do with me. So that's how we poets think when something like that happens. And then I thought I'd read a few newer ones. The first is from that chapbook Kenneth mentioned. It's called Exile. If you go to Two River, you can find it and read it for free. I'm very proud of it. And you can also print it up if you want to print it up. Or you can go to Subterranean. I think there's a few more printed copies at Subterranean. Another true story here. This is called Looking Down as I Walk. The life of the mind is writing your name on a jailhouse wall. I guess I had to go to hell. And now the stupid bell rings when I walk by Richmond Place, and it freaks me out like it always did, as I recall how Michelle had warned me when I was on the precipice of solipsism. But like I said, I had to go. And if there had been some hand to hold in that drastic symbolic mess, I would have grasped it. And then I think I wrote this last Christmas. It's also a true story. And it takes place where I am now, down in Carbondale. Portentous Dispensary. This was published in the Blue Mountain Review, oddly. When Lady Love took me back to Carbondale for Christmas, the first thing we did was hit the dispensary. And when they took him into the inner sanctum, I was left out with the receptionist and the security guard, and everything was quiet and charged when suddenly the receptionist said, "Order for Matthew Cross." And she and the guard were just cracking up, and I was so still. And then she said, I just had to do it. And I knew right then, light as hell, it was going to be my annus mirabilis, because I had outlived all of my influences, and time was up. And I saw clearly through some kind of screen. And then Lady Love came out with the dope, and we split. And this is one I like that I don't believe anyone else likes too much, but I hope you do. It keeps going around and getting rejected. It's called New Life on the Mississippi. I have this old safe that's full of my poems, but last night I dreamt that it was full of little nuclear missiles. I looked and looked for someone in authority to tell about it, but when I found her, she didn't want to hear me. At least let me give you the combination, I said. That way I'll be free. She sent me to the nearest advertising agency, and I started drinking again and making all kinds of money. One night, working late, I stood at the window. Our building was situated right in the middle of the Poplar Street Bridge. It was dark, but I was able to see that the muddy Mississippi was now full of bright, colorful skittles. Oh, I think I'll read one more here. I'll read two more, very short ones. That last one was an advertisement for Skittles. Maybe they'll pick it up. All right, my first ever insight. It was a bird talking, and I was supposed to be on another level, one where people communicated and everything would be revealed to me. After they let me race around the women's ward, I was called into the conference room to be interviewed by 6 shrinks, and I went in smirking and intense and declared I'd found my object relation, and the secret local newscaster they had sitting in deliberately tapped her toe, and one doctor asked if I could fly. And I said I felt like jumping out the window and taking off into the sky, but that wasn't physically possible. And he said, "That's a good start." And I felt like a toddler again, going from the pure illusion of love into the gnosis of the body of light. Write your obsessions, they say. I say, lay down your miracles. And just a bit of a little poem I wrote that I like called Sense. I want to write something that erupts into an enormous meaning, something that shines a light on a heretofore undiscovered truth. In fact, I want to put my whole life into the page, so that when I die, I will know that the biggest risk possible paid off, and that all of the claims I made when I was young and full of wine at Scholar's House came correct. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Matt. You somehow managed to make me even more sad that we are not in person. So thank you for bringing some humor to your set. So thanks for reading. Stick around for our question and answer session after Teddy. So our last poet for the evening is Teddy Norris. Teddy holds an MLA from Ye Old Washington University in St. Louis. And before retirement, she taught literature and writing at St. Charles Community College for 2 decades. She also edited the college's literary journal Mid Rivers Review for 5 years. Her work has appeared in various print and online journals, including the Country Dog Review, Little Patuxent, is not easy to say, Review, the Switchgrass Review, Broad River Review, Cackalack, and Flying South. Her chapbook Pillars of Salt was published by Finishing Line Press in 2015. She lives in the city of St. Charles with her very supportive husband and 2 cats who categorically refuse to appear in a video. Is it just the husband, or are the cats also who refuse?
All of them.
All of them. More info at teddynorris.com. Teddy, take it away.
Hello, and I want to reiterate my thanks, as the other 2 poets have done, to the Poetry Center for inviting me. I'm honored to be reading this evening with Becky and Matt. And I want to thank the Poetry Center not just for the readings and the concerts, but for all the other things like the high school poetry contest. So kudos to St. Louis Poetry Center, and for Dwight for reaching out to me. I'm going to share 2 or 3 fairly new pieces and a couple of older published ones. I know that we're all really ready to be done with all things COVID, but if you'll indulge me, I would like to offer one pandemic poem. A lot of things disappeared during this long, strange time, right? Big and little, and sometimes just weird things. We've had furniture on order since June, and about a month ago, about a month ago this month, we were told that it's on a truck somewhere out there. Don't know where, but anyway, this poem is, of course, about more than just the disappearance of material, consumable things. Disappearances in the time of COVID. The recipe, one I rarely made, called for dry mustard. Barely a spoonful, but I had none in the pantry. 3 masked trips to the grocer's, but none on the shelves. Everyone out. No one knew why, only that orders had not been filled. The bread yeast shortage made sense. In the pandemic, we'd all become bakers extraordinaire, and toilet paper hoarding was yesterday's news. But why dry mustard, this seldom used spice? Another absence, something else gone missing. Out there, somewhere. They disappear, perhaps to return at some point, or not. Buffet lines, deli food samples, a favorite snack cracker or scented soap, sips from communion cups, facials, handshakes and kisses on the cheek, faces behind windows, voices on the phone. January, again, month of things to do or not, closets emptied, books reread and given away, calendars with days and days to fill, still too many days gone, empty bank accounts, tables without food, empty chairs, missing smiles, missing faces, empty hearts, engines running on empty, without enough breath. Above the pulsing cosmos, below the ceaseless march across centuries, enduring mystery of the cradle and its contents, of things appearing, disappearing. Tiny diorama balanced atop a blue orb that spins and spins beneath an infinite firmament. Out there, the question lingers, its sting peppery on the tongue. During this time of restricted travel, I know we're all ready to travel again, right? My husband and I have been missing traveling to Charleston, South Carolina, a place we both love to visit. If you know that charming city, you will recognize the reference to the Painted Ladies, those lovely pastel homes that are down near the Battery. This is Charleston morning. Down by the Battery, morning rouses, soft as a sleep-tousled child, trailing a gauzy shawl of fog over the water, toward the shoulders of the Painted Ladies, preparing for their daily preening in the sun, for the tourist who will stroll and sigh, so beautiful, but the heat, oh my. Beyond the hedges, behind the black lace gates, gardeners top off mossy fountains, grim lawns of homes that hold their history close as the heat. In due time, from cool courtyard sanctuaries, residents will emerge, elegant as new magnolias, unfolding creamy faces to the sun. Visiting voyeurs attempt an early peek inside the shaded walls, imagining a ghostly past. They wander on to shop the stalls of Market Street, then retreat to chilled hotels to rest their feet, anticipate their evening meal, a planter's punch, a bit of jazz, planning for tomorrow's brunch. In kitchens on King and Queen, on Broad and Meeting and Rue St. Jean, chefs conjure low-country mysteries to the cobbled clop of carriage tours, pausing mid-block to point out the old, the new, the storied, the true. And this steepled city, lovely and lasting as a sweetgrass basket, welcomes another day, invites the spirits of the living and the long gone to the dance. This was a poem written to a prompt, and the challenge was to write a poem about some small routine action that we perform without thinking about it, something seemingly not at all poetic. This is a contemplation of the trimming of nails. Who thinks to think about the quick, sharp cuts of the keratin, the little clinking sound of the clippers doing their duty, chopping away the excess, letting the pale, dead moons fall to the floor. Mindless, necessary routine, a tidying of those useful tools we each possess even before we arrive to parents stunned with gratitude who count up 10 and 10, then marvel at such exquisite flexing and curling, the surprise pinprick of sharpness capping each tiny tip, with this substance destined not to become skin or hair, paradoxically growing, yet once visible, no longer alive. As a child, before I understood finalities, I was frightened by tales suggesting these nails, part viciousness, part vanity, might continue to grow after death. Who, I wondered, would agree to groom the hands of the dead? My father, his hands roughened from sawmill work, used his pocket knife, kept razor sharp, to trim his fingernails. In later life, when he enlisted me to cut them for him, I needed both my thumbs to force the clippers through his toughened nails. I held my breath each time I came to his left index finger, part of its first knuckle claimed by the saw, always slightly raw, where the tiniest bit of nail protruded still. My mother had no interest in manicures, even when all she had was time and doting aides who would vie to paint Miss Vi's nails with tiny stars. Each visit there I'd coax her to uncurl her fingers, her will, like her nails, still stronger than my own. "Don't cut too close," she'd whisper, with just a hint of a wince, then beam her thanks once we'd completed our ritual. Two rescued barn cats who share my life, still more than a little wild and wily, detest their periodic pedicures. By turns I cradle one, its 4 feet facing up, in the crook of my left arm, and toggle each toe to extend the nail. The male's extruded nails are thicker, blunter at the tips, his sister's curved as fishing hooks and just as sharp. I keep my voice soft and calm, my hold gentle but firm. I'm careful with each cut, mindful of the quick, of how I cut too close once, the bright spurt a quick reminder of the faint line between the dead and the alive. When my mother was alive and I went to visit her in the nursing home, I spent a lot of time driving on a 2-lane highway that was really, really curvy. It was challenging, especially at night or in bad weather, but it was a really good thinking time. This is south on 61, the day after New Year's. Before me, the blue-black ribbon spools out, threading through winter woods, naked save for the clusters of cedars standing guard in the green uniforms. Shaking off my interstate numbness, I settle into a rhythm, allow myself to be reminded. This is January, month of doors, closing on the storehouse of the known, opening onto mute corridors. In the periphery of my high beams, periodic bits of clotted feather, fur, and bone, plodding and timid, fleet and indiscreet. Their travels have crisscrossed the risky mystery. I catalog carcasses, tally months of almost, life's math and aftermath. Drive on, adjust the radio, lean into the turns, try to ignore the stars so terrifyingly near. And this being February, well, I should say winter isn't my favorite season, and February may be my least favorite long, short month. Here's a little February poem. Midwinter Crisis of Faith. February, dirty dishwater month of unreliable math. Fewer days, but somehow totaling more hours of relentless gray. Month of discontent, when discount stores throw churlish light on streets gritted with recycled snow, while the countryside sighs, longs to heave its pale bulbs and seeds from sodden graves. Month when hearts, arrowed with hope, lie abject as inner city dogs on their icy chains. The month when we whine and stalk illusion, wrestle it to the ground to see it bleed. A bit of a winter theme going on here. We were talking before we started reading about what we've been doing during the pandemic, and I've been enrolled in some online poetry webinars that meet once a week, and listening to some amazing poets read amazing poems. It's been a great antidote for the winter drearies. And webinars, of course, we can see the poets, but they don't see us, and we don't see each other. This is after hearing the poet read. It's February for a few more days. The most recent snow has melted, surrendered into dismal, dirty mounds where all the corners and edges meet. But this part of the Midwest still has its shoulders hunched against winter, knowing it's too soon for spring's cleaning. Another February, and the pandemic is easing, or so they tell us. But above the masks, we're still darting our eyes as if the stranger just rounding the corner, or that slight throat clearing we hear behind us, might be our shape-shifting enemy. Today, relentless gray. My worry for the world, a leaden coat I don't want to wear. But then, miraculous marriage of the ancient and new, a poetry webinar, and in my heart, tender as April's wispy green, a kind of thawing. From across the globe we've gathered as if around some communal fire to warm ourselves with words. The class theme is resilience, how so often it resides in the small things. And clearly, each selected poem has been written for such a time as this, just for today's listeners. The poet reads and we listen, rapt, type our grateful responses into the chat. And though we're all muted, save for the poet, we hear our mutual hushed exhalations as each poem ends. And though our faces aren't visible, we see each other's misted eyes. When the poet concludes, we catch ourselves waving our grateful goodbyes before turning toward our windows, toward the possibility of sun. Thank you so very much.
Thanks so much, Teddy. I really appreciate that. So we have all of our poets returning to the stage now, and I'm really, really excited to have a good 10 or 12 minutes to engage with all of you. So I would love to kind of start with kind of that last thing you brought up, Teddy, about engaging with other poets online. When Matt, before we began the reading, and Matt was off finding that luscious scarf, Teddy and Becky and I were talking about engaging in these online poetry webinars. So I'm curious to hear from you kind of what you've gotten from those webinars. I mean, this is an unexpected time we're in, so probably unexpected gems that you're discovering through those kinds of interfaces. So I'm just curious what gifts you've received from engaging in those.
Kenneth, you're talking to me.
Teddy and,
Okay.
and Becky specifically, but Matt,
Okay.
if you have also, I'd love to hear from anyone. If you want to start, Teddy, that'd be great.
Okay. Well, one of the things that came up one week that seems so obvious, but I hadn't really thought about it. I remember thinking during all this downtime that I should be writing more. I have time. Why am I not writing more? And we had an interesting discussion about how you can write out of sadness and good things can come from that poetically. You can even write out of anger, although it's harder. but it's really nearly impossible to write out of fear. And because we've been in this fearful, place of chaos and whatever it's been,
Mm,
that many people apparently have felt this uh, sort of constricted or something about writing.
mm.
But the webinars have helped me sort of prime the pump again, I think, get started. And as I said before, it's just been, um, I feel exhilarated after listening to these poets read and hearing such amazing poems by some poets that I've known about and known and had heard read before, but then I discover new ones. So that's just always such a thrill. And the theme of this one that I'm enrolled in most recently about resilience and it being in the small things. And it's particularly focused on nature. I guess I would say Becky would love it. And just looking at things more closely. And for those of you who might know Annie Dillard's work, Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, if you remember that book, that getting down low and up close to things and really looking and seeing and then taking that in and letting it become something like poetry or I suppose music, if you are a musician. So that's been such a really good reminder for me that even though we talk about living in the moment and being in the moment, how we still forget to do that. But I think many people have started to do that a bit more, hopefully.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, and you mentioned kind of getting low, getting on, getting engaged more closely with stuff, being, an active observation. Becky, you talked about kind of reading mostly poems about looking and observing. I'm curious if you have been able to practice that more as a writer via these webinars. So again, just same question. I'm curious what gifts you've been receiving from those engagements.
I think I like the way you phrase that. What gifts we're receiving. I think that the biggest gift that has come out of this whole experience of things being online and observed versus engaging in person has been that I have learned to be a better listener. Very often, if I'm looking at something or listening to something, I'm also, my mind is over here doing wheelies or something. But because things are online now, or, I'm looking at something in print as opposed to talking to somebody, I'll take time to see it twice or read it twice, or maybe even 3 times. And I find that every time I hear things I didn't hear before. So it's a chance to kind of recalibrate my ears and my eyes, to take
Yeah,
a little bit more time and get into depth and to listen to other poets talk about poems they like and how they're reading it. How does someone else read a poem and take it apart? Because you really only learn to write by learning to read better.
sure.
So
So
I
true.
think it's just trying to learn to be a better reader. And
Yeah.
that's the biggest plus of all this being locked up, that we have a chance to see things we didn't and hear things we didn't see and hear before.
That's right. Like my new rescue cat walking across the couch right
Yes.
there, for example.
Yes.
Um, so before we started the reading, I was, when we were talking about this, I was saying, conversely for myself, and this is obviously ironic and ridiculous from somebody who has been facilitating a virtual poetry reading for a year now. In the evening, after my eyes have been glued to a screen for 8 hours, the last thing I want to do is get online and look at a screen and talk about poetry. Matt, I'm curious how you have experienced engaging with other poets through venues like this one. Has it been life-giving? Has it been life-taking? Kind of curious about your experience.
Well, when the pandemic really took hold in what was it, March of 2020?
Mm-hmm.
That was about right
Yeah.
then, right?
Yes.
We were on Facebook all the time, my friends and I, and we were sort of like, "How do you like Facebook now?" Because we'd been complaining about it, and suddenly we're using it all the time, and one, then about a year ago, I got on Twitter, and you wouldn't believe the amount of poets and writers and mystery writers and talking about writing a mystery and just different writers on Twitter. It's remarkable. So, like 80% of my career has been conducted over social media and stuff like that. And it's been rewarding in the sense that I've discovered a lot of new journals and other poets and stuff like that. But I remember when we thought the pandemic was ending last summer, we had a gig at the Way Out Club. The Way Out Club downtown, or not downtown, but Jefferson was
Mm-hmm.
closing. And so we all gathered, and that was when everybody was starting to get vax and all that. And we all thought it's over. And nobody was wearing masks, and we were all hugging and hanging out. And it was
Mm-hmm.
just so joyful. So I really hope we can get back to that somehow. I mean, I don't want to knock the computer because it's given me such gifts, but there's nothing like everybody getting together and just being a billion and, hugging and shaking hands and
Yeah.
not using sanitizer.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, for those of you who were able to make it to the November reading at the end of last year, I mean, we, I don't even know if Aaron's going to like cut my mic that it was inappropriate, but I mean, we brought some good whiskey and we're offering it to the crowd. And there was a line to the stage of just random strangers toasting a drink to being in person again. It was
Yeah.
just, and it was so simple, and folks were able to revel in that kind of simplicity of being together. So I agree. I also hope we get together again soon. We only have a few minutes left, so I wanted to ask one more question before we gather some paradise. And that is this: you all, in your own ways, are very, very interested and focused on narrative in some way, and this poetry reading sometimes becomes as much for my own education as a writer as anything else. So I'm going to ask a selfish craft question, and that is, how do you know when a poem wants to be a poem, right, and not a short story? I would imagine that any of you on this reading could write a pretty fantastic short story too. So how do you know when that idea wants to be a poem and that idea does not want to be a short story or a micro essay or any other myriad number of forms? And I'm going to randomly pick on Matt to go first. We'll go in reverse order this time.
Well, that's a difficult question because I've found you can't just write everything that pops into your head down. I think that um, you can see the remarkable in little things, and then some big things happen, which are cool. So I think you got to rely on your intuition and figure out how you're going to form it and structure it. But oftentimes something will happen. I'll say I should write a poem about that, and then I think no. So I don't know. I guess I'm going on intuition now. I'll say,
Okay,
but
that's a fair answer.
yeah, you
That's
can't
fair.
write everything down.
It's true. Becky, what about you?
Well, I think if I tried to write a short story or a novel, it would be pretty abysmal. Pretty abysmal, yes. I wouldn't know how to go about it. Um, what tells me something is going to be a poem as opposed to a page of notes is when I start seeing tension in a group of words,
Hmm.
and it changes if you make a line break. It's kind of like building musical phrases,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
and you can kind of play with it. It's like if you have cake batter, you can pour it into a cake pan, or you can pour it into muffin cups, or you
Oh, I
can
love that.
put it in a springform pan, and it
Mhm.
all creates different shapes from the same thing. But if you try to turn it into a novel, you just get a big sheet cake.
Yeah.
I
No, I
wouldn't know
like
what to
that
do
though. I
with
mean,
that.
I'm hearing you say, you maybe have a narrative idea, but once it begins to um, kind of access the tools of poetry, the idea itself, then
Yes.
that's when it kind of begins to take shape. Teddy, I'm going to give you the last word on that. Any thoughts?
Well, I love Becky's analogy. That was so
Me
creative.
too.
I'm in a small writers group and we talk about this, and I used to talk about it with my students. And I just readily confess, I wish that I were a better prose writer. I've written a few short stories. I don't think I could ever produce a novel. My problem is that I can't sustain a plot, I think, is the short answer. And I love good short stories. I do. But I just find that I'm more drawn to, sort of condensing it down as much as I can. And a lot of my poetry is narrative. I do write some that isn't, but a lot of it is narrative. But I
Yeah.
admire people who can write short stories. I do.
Hmm.
But that's not my thing, I guess.
That's fair. Well, thanks to you all. I want to begin to close us up this evening by gathering some paradise, which those of you who watch or attend this reading with some regularity know that it is a practice I have swiped from Al Filreis, who hosts the Poem Talk podcast through the Poetry Foundation. So this is just an opportunity for our poets to boost the signal on something that is exciting them in the world of poetry, whether that be a book or a poem or a podcast or what have you, to give our viewers an opportunity to continue their exploration of poetry beyond this series. So I'll start and say it was when I read my notes this evening that I found out that Gabrielle Calvacaresi will be judging the contest this year. What an incredible poet. I cannot recommend Gabrielle highly enough. So they have, I think, at least one or two books out. So I'll see if maybe Aaron can kind of post that in the chat, but highly recommend. So Teddy, what about you? What paradise might you gather?
Well, I knew, I don't remember how long ago it was that I discovered Danusha Lamaris as a poet and Camille Dungy, but I've been reading their work. And then in this webinar, not to go on and on about it, but getting to hear Naomi Nye read again, I just, oh my goodness, just her voice. I could listen to her just read, the obituaries or something. Just, it's wonderful to hear her read. So that was a real thrill. And Ada Limon, I had not read that much of her work, and I really like her work as a poet as well. So it's been kind of a feast.
Yeah, and Naomi is such a good reader. I think it's hard to find poets who are excellent readers of their own poetry, right? I think you all are that as well. But
Thank
she
you.
just really,
Yeah, she is.
great. Matt, what about you? What paradise might you gather for us?
I've been down here, stuck down here in Carbondale for a long time, and my sister has a lot of contemporary poetry and a lot more than I do at home. And I came across an old book by a fellow named James Kimbrough, and he teaches at FSU. And I wrote him an email because I liked his book so much, and we exchanged some poems. And it turns out he's a super nice guy, and so I was reading Louise Glick down here. I never had gotten into her, and she won the Nobel Prize and everything. And I was just amazed. I mean, like almost every poem is so great.
Yeah,
And lots of other people. Lots of other people.
good choice. I think Louise
And
Glick
recently,
also.
yeah,
I think she also selected Dana Levin's first book, local
oh,
poet connected to the St. Louis Poetry Center. So yeah, good inadvertent Poetry
yeah.
Center plug. Becky, what about you?
Speaking of Dana Levin, I will hunt down any online piece that is where she and another poet are dialoguing or where she's interviewing someone. Her insights into other people's poetry or how to read a poem are just mind blowing. I
Yeah.
just follow her. I also recently picked up Allison Funk. She's a local treasure. Her latest book, I think, is The Visible Woman, and I decided I liked that, and I went back and looked at her very first book, which is, I think, Living at the Epicenter. It's a couple of decades old now, but it is just amazing. I mean, it makes my hair stand on end. It's so good, and for that to be her first book was just amazing. Just blew me away.
Yeah,
I loved
that's
it.
awesome.
And I also picked up an old copy of David Ignatow's selected poems, which is really interesting. He's a little bit bleak, kind of surrealistic and bleak, very imaginative. But this book is put together with a preface to each section by Robert Bly, and he talks about how Ignatow's poems kind of go down to like below the mythic level, down to like I don't know, whatever's below that, and he gives some context to how to read the poems, and I really appreciated that. It made me really stop and rethink a lot of things. So that was pretty incredible.
Good one. Well, thank you for sharing that. Really appreciate it. You all have given us a lot to chew on and a lot to read. So thanks for that. Well, we are going to close up this evening. I just want to say thank you so much to all of you for showing up and sharing your poetry with us. Before we wrap up, I want to mention to everybody that our next reading is going to be on March 22nd, so a month from today. So do mark your calendars. Our readers are going to be Aaron Wiles, Joe Shaper, and we are still working on confirming one last poet for that. Just a reminder that you will be able to view tonight's reading on Facebook after tonight. So welcome if you are catching this after the 22nd of February. Thank you to Aaron Quick for, as I think Becky stole my metaphor, for being the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain, for turning all of the internet and technology gears. Thanks to all of you viewing and listening for choosing to show up this evening and checking out some poetry. Everyone have a lovely and safe evening.
Thank you, Kenneth.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.